Welcome to this new episode of the Blueprints podcast. I'm Edgar Roth from Symbiotic, and today I'm joined by Paul Dylan-Ennis from UCD to explore his work around crypto's social layer. Hope you enjoy.
Crypto is an industry, so it is like a financial industry, but it's also a socio-political movement in some way. Bitcoiners are American and Ethereans are European, spiritually, regardless of where they're actually physically located. And then when it comes to Solana is an interesting one because it hasn't been analyzed much. But I do think Solana is essentially our Silicon Valley mindset, or what historically was called the California ideology.
One piece of crypto culture that has definitely changed is the arrival of institutions. I'm curious to know what type of impact you think the institutional adoption has on the social layer of crypto.
Careful what you wish for when it comes to institutions. You may get your ETH to 10K, but you may lose your community is my fear. And I think if Bitcoin has a viewpoint other than cypherpunk, then that's where you might get into the situation of fracturing of the community.
Hey Paul, how are you doing today?
Good, no problems.
Amazing. So let's kick things off with some rapid fire questions. Name one underrated book or paper on crypto culture that people should check out.
It would be Jonathan Beer, The Block Size War, which is about the Bitcoin civil war. Really goes into the nuance and details, and it's a good history book. It's about 10 years old now, but still the best book on forks, hard forks.
What's your favorite project in crypto that isn't an L1?
I believe this is the popular choice. Everybody has the same answer from my little world, which is Fileverse, the alternative to Google Productivity Suite.
What aspect of crypto makes the least sense to you?
That we're still using Twitter, even though we have Farcaster and Lens.
What's the biggest myth about crypto governance?
The biggest myth is that people believe in the myths of decentralization. Anybody who is in any way aware or involved in governance knows that these things are not really decentralized. So the myth is the myth itself.
And lastly, what's the biggest L you've taken on chain?
I was told to buy a Bored Ape by a friend, but I decided to go to the pub instead. So I was on the page and I could see I was about to connect, and then I just had a message from a friend saying, let's go out. And I said, okay, that sounds better than buying another boring NFT.
Funny friend stories, to be fair. I think most people have like the reverse story where like their biggest L on chain is because they bought a very valuable NFT that lost a lot of value. Let's go into some long form questions. So your background mixes philosophy, tech, and now crypto academia at UCD. Like, I'm interested to understand like how you first stumbled into like studying blockchain or crypto, and what hooked you enough to make it your focus today.
As the years goes by, this becomes a long story. So I have to keep shortening it because just by my age, I have to compact it. So, I mean, I first got into crypto around 2012 just because I was lucky. I had friends who were involved in WikiLeaks, and then also people just were talking about Silk Road at the time quite a lot. And what kept recurring in these stories amongst my friends was Bitcoin. So that's what initially drew me in. And at that point, I had no interest in money or finance or even knew what libertarianism was. So the excitement was just the fact that it was all very, very new to me. So I went to the Bitcoin Talk forums to check it out. There was nothing on that page, so on those discussion forums, that I knew anything about. And that was what really excited me. It was like experiencing a genuine subculture for the first time in my life. So every generation had its own version of this, the rave scene or hippies. And so, okay, this is kind of like a version of that, something that's genuinely novel. And then I just used to keep track of crypto once a week because you could do that back then. So every Saturday I would go and I would read the news stories, of which there were around like 7 maybe. And that was how I kept up in crypto. And then it was just an interest or a hobby. You can see I had a miner. I had an Antminer S1, which I bought from China, and it took months to arrive. So I was like relatively enmeshed in the world, but I wasn't a participant in the community in any serious sense where people would know who I am or anything. And then around 2015, I was doing a postdoc in ethics, sort of business ethics. That's when you know your career is really off track as a philosophy person. You're doing ethics in the business school. So by chance, I saw an ad, and the job ad was, we're looking for a blockchain researcher in the university I'm in now, University College Dublin. And I applied for it on a whim. I didn't think I would be able to get the job because I didn't write about crypto or anything like this at that point. But then afterwards, they told me I was the only person with this combination that they needed, which was an interest in crypto and a PhD. So there's just like nobody else that they could hire. So it's just pure luck. And then what I realized was, okay, there's not going to be an opportunity in my life where there's a topic that nobody is really an expert on, that I could become an expert in ahead of everybody else, so that the future generations, I'll be amongst the first people who try to write articles about Bitcoin or Ethereum. So I just made that decision on that basis. In a way, that was probably informed by crypto. I think that's a crypto pragmatism that I picked up from being involved in that world. So by that point, my principles, my philosophical, artistic pretensions, and beliefs had all began to shatter. I guess the beginning of my degen decline at that point. And then from then on, it was just a case of immersing myself more and more. So I started to contribute articles to CoinDesk, and then that's how people really began to pick up on my work. Around 2020, people began to associate me with writing about governance, and so, okay, this is my niche, this is my area.
And so why are you still here? Why haven't you left by now, you would say?
Good question. Probably because probably because there's nowhere else to go. I'm so deeply enmeshed in it. My identity is so wedded to the crypto industry that, like, it would almost be like a psychic break, on an immense level for me to really extricate myself from it. And I think that that's a common thing in crypto. It's unusual in that, and this is something I showed my students. I showed them videos from the industry where people come in and they give 5-minute talks, like video talks from different people, sometimes big names that I can try to wrangle, and they always say the same thing in the beginning of the video, is that this is a job where it merges your social life and the work life in a way which is unusual. And I think that that's because crypto is an industry, so it is like a financial industry, but it's also a socio-political movement in some way. So even if you're just a casual crypto person, you probably at least have some vague belief in decentralization. And so yeah, we're a counterculture plus a industry, which is and that involves full immersion. So yeah, I think it's more just like can't escape as opposed to anything else.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, and it's also like almost like we're attacking like the status quo of like how value is being perceived by humans. At least that's what I like in crypto. Something that's I definitely love about your profile is that you're quite unique in the sense that like you don't necessarily come from an engineering background, in the sense that like you've been working in like Web2 before. So crypto has often been dismissed by traditional academia, and I think your profile is unique because you're a professor at UCD. The people I remember like in the early days of Bitcoin that were the biggest critics were the ones with the highest like cognitive authority. How does it feel to study crypto while being part of that same academic establishment?
It's complicated. If you look at almost every academic article until around 2020, they're all the same. So every article says these people in crypto, they believe that they're a decentralized community, but did you know that they're actually centralized? And it's always the same arguments, more or less. And very often they were focused on Bitcoin, but they're in recent years that switched over to Ethereum to some extent. But a lot of these articles that were from people that I would consider almost tourists. So they would dip into Bitcoin or Ethereum for maybe a year to write that article, to get that article into a journal, and then they would move on. So it was a drive-by account of the crypto community and crypto culture. So that's changing in recent years. You begin to see projects. So there's the blockchain gov project will be an example of this. It's a European project led by Primavera de Filippi, who's probably the more like the most crypto native academic there is. And then all these postdocs that she has and these PhD students that she has are involved in the crypto world are, working at DAOs, they work at crypto companies, etc. So this is changing. Right now, it is still a bit fringe. So how I'd characterize my experience is people consider me almost to be working on a fringe topic, maybe a little bit eccentric. So within the broad, say, school, the business school, on the edges of the business school, crypto is accepted. So it is seen as a legitimate enterprise. The president has a meme coin. ETFs exist, but it's not at the center. It's not at the center of the curriculum. My crypto class is an elective. It's not like part of the core curriculum, and probably won't be for a long time. So yeah, I feel like I'm slightly on this eccentric fringe topic, but people in academia are very tolerant of that. I think there is an idea that maybe like academics have become closed-minded, narrow, and politically inclined in a certain direction, but that's not really the experience that I tend to find. What they do when it comes to crypto, I think it's not that they hate it, they just don't really know that much about how it really is. They have a superficial understanding that they heard like in passing from maybe some Netflix documentaries, maybe occasional articles in The Guardian, and then it's just that they don't really know, say, what really goes on versus what we do, which is every day we're immersed in it. So that's my tolerant reading of academics when it comes to the crypto industry.
Where do you think that like negative bias comes from? Because like, of course, like any new field is going to, you're going to be ignorant about it. What is special about crypto that like made academics like not just ignorant about it, but not willing to learn more and like give crypto a chance?
It hits a lot of things that academics dislike. So in the dinner party sense of academia. So let's say you go to a dinner party with, say, 10 academics, around 8 of them are going to be people who like kind of share the same beliefs, like roughly about like society. I'm not necessarily saying that like they're liberal or conservative, but they've got a sense of foreboding at the moment, say, about our society is moving toward this like authoritarianism and maybe even fascism through populist politics. And Bitcoin is just part of that. Because if you start explaining, say, Bitcoin or Ethereum or crypto culture to people, you have to admit, okay, there is this populist strain, there is this libertarian strain. Now, your argument is going to be, well, but there's also much more than that, that it's more nuanced. But they're not going to get much further than Trump has a meme coin, as mentioned earlier. So it's associated with right-wing politics. There is a book by David Columbia which essentially characterizes crypto as right-wing ideology disguised. And that's a very popular book that gets brought up to me by other academics quite a bit. And then the other side of it was the historical use of proof of work. So a lot of people just think that it's like environmentally detrimental, and they don't really know that Ethereum has transitioned over to proof of stake. And yeah, those are the two things. That's enough to really make Bitcoin and Ethereum negatives, is that they're right-wing coded in the superficial sense, the environmental impact, at least historically, but currently with Bitcoin. And then one other thing that I think is probably worth mentioning is that, yeah, as an incumbent, as something which is challenging the traditional inherited institutional view of money and cooperation and organization, then this is just something that's a little bit of a challenger. And I think people are just dismissive of newcomers and new challengers. So in the finance part of the business school, because Bitcoin and Ethereum, they don't really operate according to the, let's say, the traditional sense of how money is supposed to operate. I think that that's just seen then as something that like is inherently going to collapse under its own weight, because they have these norms about how money and how money is supposed to operate. And then crypto is just this thing that gets thrown at them, and they're hoping that it collapses before they have to deal with it, is how I tend to feel about it.
Very interesting. And so like, do you think that like, how long will crypto have to survive until these people start looking at it again and just like accept its existence?
Yeah, this is funny because it's nearly 20 years. Like we're closing in on 20 years. I know we're obviously not quite there yet, but I always tend to think in my brain that in my life experience, the internet, it was around 20 years before it went from something I remember doing like in my bedroom and my parents didn't understand it. It wasn't part of the school. It wasn't in like the university that much. I was sort of just at that tail end of it. And then at some point it flips over and everything is the internet, and you're telling your parents not to use the phone. So it completely switches over at a certain point. And with crypto, I don't know whether crypto is something which will ever be, which will immerse society in the same way as the internet. But I do think it is a little bit insulting to have the staying power that crypto has had against all the odds, and people are still presuming that it's going to disappear or that it's just a fad. We are at least partially responsible for this because crypto people tend to do this thing which I really dislike. They talk about crypto as something that's coming in the future, like we're early. And it's no, we're like we're really deep in. We're like generationally like quite far for an emergent technology. Maybe you are new to crypto and therefore it all seems new to you, but that's not the case. So I think on our side we should stop saying that. We have to stop using this language of it's something that is to come, and that also includes this promise, this implicit promise of it's going to reach the mainstream or onboard the mainstream. Whereas, and a phrase that I use quite a bit when it comes to crypto is a subculture that cannot accept it's a subculture. So we're like, my view is we're just going to be a part of the wider financial world. We're not going to be the major part of it. We're not going to be the lens through which everything is seen, but we will be a part of the CNBC update or the Bloomberg update. But we struggle with accepting that we are not going to be the totality, and we might just be a part.
Super interesting. And I guess like you get a lot of feedback from the community on crypto Twitter, and maybe that's unique about also crypto is that people are extremely vocal on social media about it. How do you think like that's shaped your work? And what's one lesson like academics could teach crypto natives and vice versa?
Yeah, this is, I guess, like from a teaching perspective, is quite fun because it really helps with your students if you can show them that you've got a Twitter account and you're like a mini influencer, a micro influencer, as one of my students called it a few years ago. Because so like the normal charge that you'll get about academics is they're not actually like they're distant. They see themselves as separate from what it is they're studying, and this is what allows them to be objective. And what I tend to see if I go to, say, a crypto event, say a crypto academic event specifically, I notice that people will talk about DAOs, they will talk about, say, layer one blockchains in a way which doesn't feel real. It feels like they've got the classic textbooks understanding. They've also got an understanding which is based on previous academic work, which itself was, and so the distance compounds over time so that you get these strange presumptions about, say, crypto, that as somebody who is like CT immersed, you just know that that's not true. Like that's not actually how people behave. That's not really how people use, I don't know, the time lock contract in like some DAOs or something like this. So so that is the main benefit is by I mean, I don't think it's a good thing that I feel this is another thing about feeling trapped by crypto. I feel I'm trapped by my Twitter account as well because if you don't continue to grow, it feels bad to leave something that you've grown to a certain degree, and so that's not a healthy thing. But in terms of being able to interpret what's really happening, to actually understand the nuance of what the community is like. So if we go back to that example of academics superficially consider crypto to be right-wing populist, it is by being in a crypto Twitter world that you understand the spectrum of different political, social beliefs, or even the apoliticism of most people. I would actually characterize most of crypto as like apolitical, just normal people or people working in business development. So let's say in many academic articles, they'll present crypto people as essentially like radical libertarians. And it's like, not really. The average crypto person is more likely to just be someone working in business development who attends ETHCC every year. That's a crypto person in the actuality, or maybe a core dev or something on those lines. So yeah, it helps me to keep the messiness, the reality of what crypto actually is against categories that seek to blunt them down into something simple and easy to understand. Because I think crypto is not easy to understand, and that is because of the people and the variance of the people. That's what I enjoy about it. The kind of, this word has become very cheesy, but like the diversity of people that exist out there.
Nah, yeah, it's super cool and something definitely like underlooked and underappreciated if you're not in crypto. Something that's core to your work is your study around crypto cultures. And like there's so many people like studying technical analysis, so many people maybe on the more like pure technical side. I think it's extremely interesting to have your perspective around like crypto cultures and how it shapes the broader system. So could you like give us a bit of a rundown of like the core clashes between like the Ethereum, Bitcoin, and Solana tribes and how they influence the space as a whole?
First thing I always say here is we are more similar than when we think. So in terms of architectural decentralization, if you zoom out, and here's where teaching really, really helps, because you're teaching Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana, which is what I do in my undergraduate class. You actually find that there's like a lot of overlap, and you don't have to teach everything again. Like if I'm teaching Solana again, I don't really need to teach peer-to-peer networks. I don't need to teach public key cryptography. But that's architecturally the same. And really the only difference you're going to be talking about is consensus mechanisms. You're talking about proof of work, proof of stake, proof of history. And even then they're not as different as we really like to imagine. Now, if you say that to a Bitcoin maximalist or an Ethereum maximalist, of course, they're going to say there's like exaggerated differences, irreconcilable. In fact, even like existential. If you don't have this consensus mechanism, like your blockchain is doomed. But in reality, I think architecturally, most blockchains are very, very similar. And then in terms of political decentralization, or just like what in academia we would call like polycentrism, the socio-political structure of people who have to take each other into account, and the cultures that you find in them, the nuances are, as I see it, now this would be my kind of quick reading of a Bitcoiners tend to be more conservative, populist, libertarian, Americanized. They like to eat steak. They went through this period of steak obsession. But I think that that's actually a good characteristic of what a Bitcoiner is like. It's don't tread on me, individualist, and that's really a Bitcoiner. And then when it comes to Ethereum, it's more liberal minded, it's more cooperative. There's, in a way, European. So I think, Bitcoiners are American and Ethereans are European, spiritually, regardless of where they're actually physically located. And then when it comes to Solana, Solana is an interesting one because it hasn't been analyzed much. But I do think Solana is essentially our Silicon Valley mindset, or what historically was called the California ideology. So it's people who may be progressively minded, but they're mostly interested in market-based solutions and solving problems, and not letting ideology get too much in the way. But then at the same time, quite recently, we have the cypherpunk renaissance coming effectively from Solana. So in Solana culture, this renewed interest in Zcash, so that they just discovered Zcash, and they are also talking more that the Coliseum hackathon. I gave a talk at the Solana super team last Friday about cypherpunk. I don't think anybody in the room had ever heard of it before, but they were interested. They were happy to listen to it. So culture is always surprising. So those imprints, I would say, are kind of my superficial survey of them. But you never quite know how these cultures are going to mutate over time. One of the things about culture, there's a phrase by Neil Postman who says, when it comes to technology, it's not something that adds or subtracts, it changes the ecology. And I think when it comes to Solana, that's what happens. It's not that Solana adds, say, in a certain direction or takes away from crypto in a certain direction. So people have a fear that Solana is going to turn us all into arc pragmatists who are like essentially effective accelerationists, and we'll lose our cypherpunk spirit. But as we can see with their cypherpunk interest, it's more a case of all the communities mutate each other in different ways. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Solana kind of mutate a little bit into a bit more cypherpunk, and then Ethereum to take on Solana characteristics. In fact, it already has. You can see a little bit of that in the last few years.
So you would say that over time, like these cultures are more likely to blend more like than just like separate themselves even more over time, right?
Yeah, I'd say it's not even that they're going to blend and separate. They will do this, but they'll be doing this all the time. So the best analogy that I would have for this is, say, just demographics in a society. So people have this idea of they want society to develop in a certain way demographically, but actually in truth, you get these crossovers and cross-fertilizations that are effectively unpredictable for the most part. And it can be quite surprising what kind of alliances are developed or how a culture is shaped in different directions, especially if you take the long view. So I'm interested in history. So this is why I have this view of when it comes to communities and cultures, not to expect that people get canceled out per se, so much as they turn into something else. They hybridize each other in interesting directions. So if I was thinking of like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana, I'd be thinking of them as three things that are caught up in the same space, whether it's just market capitalization, CoinGecko, CoinMarketCap. That's the microeconomy that they're all trapped together as 1, 2, 3 on the list. And that they're more likely to just, especially because they're in the same social media ecosystem, Neil Postman says, is the clearest way to understand the community is to look at its tools for communication. So we're all on the same media, we're on the same information superhighway. which is crypto Twitter. And so we are infecting each other with each other's ideas or mimetic ideas constantly. So yeah, so I'm more of that opinion that we transform each other in unexpected ways as opposed to tending to separate. Again, that goes back to the idea of we're more similar than we like to admit. If you're an outsider and you saw a Bitcoin or an Ethereum and a Solana person standing together, they would look like the same type of person. But if you were in that group, you think you're radically different from each other.
I think also like one piece of crypto culture that has definitely changed over the past couple of months/years is the arrival of institutions. So for a long time, institutions were coming and coming, and they were going to change our world and pump our bags. But now they're finally here. I'm curious to know like what you think, what type of impact you think the institutional adoption has on the social layer of crypto.
So when it comes to institutions, like you can see already the influence through the media. So a little bit of a phrase that is sort of designed to needle this change that I'd like to use is a CTVC, podcast industrial complex. So the crypto Twitter plus Blockworks, this world where you see a business schoolification of what's going on. So these are people who see themselves affected as post-ideological. I can see the character, right, the temperament of this type of person, because as a business school lecturer, it is my type of student that I typically would encounter. And now they're coming into the crypto world, which now they see as okay, acceptable, so I can go work there. But they're now looking at it as okay, what did I learn from the business school and how do I apply this to this world? And maybe I'll be the person who's an expert that really brings the institutions in. This is the CTVC industrial complex kind of way of thinking. I think there's a poison chalice possibly here. So the reason why people entertain this, I think ultimately is because they want ETH to go to 10K. So they think the institutions are the key to making that happen. And so people are just willing to say, okay, wouldn't it be great if BlackRock was, on Ethereum? As if that would be, I don't know, for me, like that's just like I couldn't care less if BlackRock was. But for it's part of the patchwork of stories, the patchwork of narratives that you're supposed to put together, which proves that Ethereum is where on-chain capital markets are really going to be. And the other part of this, of course, is the fear of Solana. So in Ethereum's case, it's sort of a repressed fear that Solana will come along and just say, well, come to us. We're more CTVC minded. So the real worry I would have is it may happen. So we may get all of these institutions using Ethereum, but the world will be grayer. I guarantee you that. It will be like walking into a KPMG or Deloitte office, and there's all these people sitting at desks and they're making reports about at this time some asset that's on BlackRock, and it's a report that nobody reads, and it's just like it's bled the interesting kind of culture out of it. So careful what you wish for when it comes to institutions. I think it's business schoolification. It's yeah. So even like you may get your ETH to 10K, but you may lose your community is my fear.
And do you think like this problem, the vulnerability of crypto being potentially like that could be like impacted by institutional adoption, is that mainly because like people start to care more and more about prices more than values?
Not necessarily. So they have always cared about price. So the obsession in crypto, even if you're the most principled, idealistic person, you are interested in price. So the old Trotsky quote, I'll do a riff on it. You may not be interested in price, but price is interested in you. You're always going to be, even when you're trying to ignore it, you'll just click on CoinGecko or CoinMarketCap, and all of a sudden your brain lights up and you're looking for opportunities. So you find yourself becoming a degen trader all the time against your best desires, maybe. So it's that's always been the case. So when it comes to the social layer, I guess to me it will be more the potential influence of institutions over the chain. So if we think about what a blockchain is from that socio-technical perspective, like as a polycentric system. So this means that we have like different power centers that take each other into account. So at the moment, this would be, say, core devs, validators, niche media. So like the Daily Gwei and Bankless would be a kind of Ethereum native media. And then node runners. So all these different elements, staking pools, RCPs, infra. So at the moment, it's a balance, and it's a balance that isn't completely institutionalized. But once those institutions come in, I think they will become more interested in things like how do we shape core development? Could we maybe seed developers into core development? Maybe we could make a client ourselves. Maybe we can send a representative from BlackRock, for example, who attends the meeting and tries to make the case for why we should adopt certain. And I don't think that's like it's something that would be easy. In fact, I would argue it's a very difficult thing to do to shape Ethereum or Bitcoin or Solana. The beautiful thing about layer one blockchain governance is that it's so globally distributed that your ability to nefariously affect it for your institutional purposes would be almost like a version of Satoshi saying it's better to be honest than to actually try to attack the chain. So it's better to stay out of it than try to change social consensus, I think. So that would be my fear, that the institutions will just see, like once some of them twig that it's possible to begin to influence the community through the social layer. That's the most dangerous thing, because the social layer can be affected in a it has more of an attack surface than the chain itself, because the chain itself is a very transparent thing. So if anybody's trying to do anything, it's pretty transparent. But in the case of the social layer, it's a cultural issue. So you're really going to have to be paying attention to people attempting to influence the culture, which is very, very hard to notice, especially in our current social algorithmic climate.
And so do you think the impacts or the potential impact of institutions is the same, whether you're looking at Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Solana? Or do you think like maybe ETH and Sol are more subject to being manipulated?
I think it's the same for everybody. The Bitcoiners have their own version of this problem, which is Michael Saylor. So Michael Saylor is essentially the institutional Bitcoin influence. There's also a current debate in Bitcoin culture around paper Bitcoin, so essentially custodial versions of owning Bitcoin through this proxy. I've seen arguments amongst Bitcoiners lately around that topic. As it becomes more difficult to secure your Bitcoin, especially as the value of Bitcoin goes up, that actually our way of onboarding people should be more along these lines. So effectively, they're mining that traditional idea of self-custody, of holding your own keys. Not your keys, not your coins, is not so sacrosanct amongst at least some segments of the Bitcoin community as it once was. So I don't think the Bitcoiners are immune to this in any way. They might be immune to somebody directly trying to influence core development, but could they be wrapped in institutions just sort of more broadly with soft power? I think they're susceptible. I think Ethereum and Solana are also just very susceptible because there is the narrative of moving TradFi on chain. So actually Ethereum and Solana are more susceptible, but in a way where like openly so, because we're asking for that to happen. We're asking for these entities to come in. So if it does happen, we can't actually say like we didn't bring it on ourselves. So that's how I would say that.
Yeah, like I guess you can't really compare like Bitcoin that's proof of work with Solana and ETH that are like proof of stake like, and like it could be a bit problematic if like institutions start owning like 30% of Ethereum, whereas like if they own 30% of BTC, I guess that's maybe more manageable.
Yeah, this is a kind of if Tom Lee owns 30% of all ETH, then do we get a sort of evil Tom Lee who decides to undertake some kind of 33% attack? So that's kind of our beginning point in Ethereum where we begin to get worried. And I think in that case, it really does. That's where the social layer part of it comes, because I've always thought of it as if somebody did have 33% of all ETH, it would be so signaled and so apparent, unless they're an evil genius or they've somehow managed to avoid Zach XBT's abilities to track the chain, that there's somebody who's consolidating such a huge amount of ETH. If it was Tom Lee, he would probably get the same pressure that Lido did. So when Lido got up to 33%, they were brought down of staked ETH. They were brought down to 23, I think it is now, or 22. That's just good old-fashioned social layer pressure on the community. But it really does show how much of it is based on the underlying sense of alignment to cypherpunk values, and that we're relying on the idea that the culture is at some point below the superficial disputes that we have, united around certain core values. And I've always said when it comes to Ethereum, at least with Ethereum, I think it's also true of Bitcoin, that it's cypherpunk is the ineliminable core, by which I mean that there's a point where if you remove those values, the community would no longer recognize itself. And so the people who really are engaged, so if we're talking about the core developers, you're talking about node runners, For them, that's the red line. If you begin to try to introduce some kind of point of centralization, if you begin censoring, if you begin accumulating enough that you're actually a genuine threat to the chain, then that is where you begin to see the response. It's almost like you can prod these people quite a bit, but once they see you violating this little box that says, okay, this is the untouchable core values. If you mess with this, we are going to stand up and begin turning against you. One of the problems we have is that we haven't had something of an existential crisis for a long time. The reason I recommended that book, Jonathan Beer's The Block Size War, is I think Ethereum people, and especially Solana people, would benefit from reading about what happens when a community is under threat by vested interests, because the Bitcoin civil war is effectively a war of the miners and the exchanges against the common person, and the common person wins. So the node runners effectively are the ones who win the Bitcoin civil war. And so we haven't had that in a while. And so we haven't had we don't really know, like, where do people lie? Where do they land? What happens if Tom Lee does do this? Um, Now, my view is that you would see the battle happening. I don't think people would passively allow it to happen, but it's been so long that nobody knows anymore. In fact, it's maybe very similar to modern Europe or something. Because if Ethereum is Europe, that in most countries, life has been so good for so long that it's hard to imagine anything bad happening. But at some point, something will for every blockchain.
Interesting. Yeah, so at the end of the day, like for these big L1s that amass like big communities like these, the social layer is often like the last layer of protection, or maybe one of the last. But maybe in different protocols where possession or influence is primarily like fueled by token possession, we have this like crypto governance that, whereby on-chain votes and DAOs. But a lot of critics just call it like decentralization theater, that it doesn't really exist, and that the power is still like within the hands of the founders, or the whales or investors, or even. So is like on-chain governance all fake, or does like real decentralization peek through at some point?
Um, yeah, it's all fake. Is the truth. When it comes to, so I make a big separation between. Only recently have I really started to make this distinction in my mind, because for me, the real decentralization, true decentralization, or what I would really call actually real polycentrism, because that's what it really is. It's not like we don't have decentralized communities, we have like polycentric communities. So effectively like distributed communities who have to take each other into account to make major decisions. And when it comes to layer one blockchains, so if we're talking about Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and a few others I would include maybe in there, that's where the decentralization exists. And that's where the core values are like genuinely baked into the protocol, and that it would be extremely difficult for anybody to change them, whether depending on the consensus mechanism. So so I separate the layer ones. Governance, to me, layer one is the real deal. But when it comes to DAOs, in the last, say, particularly like the last 6 months to a year, I would be happy to say at this point that not only is it the case that they aren't decentralized, but like everybody knows. So there isn't, the mythology of decentralization in DAOs is gone. The Zizek thing again of they know what they're doing, but they do it anyway. So it's like we know that DAOs aren't decentralized, but we do it anyway. So you can see this in recently examples like Scroll, right? So Scroll effectively has a DAO. They're trying to build out this like old school DAO structure of delegates plus snapshot plus governor, doing their incentivization programs, whatever. And then does the Scroll, like the company itself, just comes in and says, actually, you're doing too much DAO stuff, so we're just going to stop all of that. And yeah, and I see this in pretty much every DAO that I've been involved with, that there's this tendency of it begins with these ideals, and then slowly but surely you realize that every decision is already being made in advance. So by the time it gets to you, you are effectively just signing off on it. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if we own up to it. So if we begin to understand that we're like leaving behind the language of idealism with DAOs, then I don't think it's a terrible situation. The best example I have of a functioning DAO would be Lido DAO. So I'm a delegate there, like an incentivized delegate in Lido. And the understanding is like that. It's essentially a company, or like it's kind of like a decentralized company, as Dan Larimer in 2013 originally envisioned all of this to be. So you have these committees, they're led by Hasu's Goose proposals. It's 2 or 3 years in advance telling you what to do. And then the committees work on these different packages belonging to the overall vision. And then you as a delegate is looking at this work and saying, okay, this is good, this is bad. But you're not under any illusions at any point that you're like collectively like all making everything happen. Like everything is happening from the committees and from Hasu, and then you're just voting on it as a sanity check. So to me, it feels more like a company, but with a new type of structure. I think that's good. Also, another DAO that I'm involved with is the crypto economic sub DAO in Jito. And there it's even way more like this is where Solana culture can be quite fascinating. There it's a straight up the sub DAO is given money. They have to do different things like buybacks. If they're successful, they get more money. And if they don't, people will not give them money. Like people don't care about the forums. They're not sitting around making every micro decision about like what the subcommittee should do or even really about anything. It's very rare that people make a post. And if you make a post, the primary thing that they're assessing is just setting some outcomes that they think they'll judge you by. And if you fail, then you fail and they'll just like completely dismiss you. So it pains me to say this as somebody who really would love there have to be in something like DAOs. But maybe Dan Larimer was right all along, and what we really have is distributed autonomous companies. I do think it would clarify the language quite a lot. So like if we could separate out these essentially kind of decentralized companies with protocols away from governance, like as in proper governance of L1 blockchains, it would probably be to our benefit, because right now we're double speaking. If you bring up governance, if you bring up decentralization, so in someone's mind, they could be thinking of two completely different things. And you spend a lot of your time essentially making like debates that aren't relevant to each side. So like I've been at these events, like a governance event, and then been on a panel where, I'm talking about layer one blockchain governance and someone else is talking about DAO governance. And it just is a confusing mess because the terms are used in different ways. So yeah, bring back DACs, I think is my view.
Got it. And maybe you could look back and the past of governance, maybe separated by like L1 governance and DAO governance, and look at like the successes and failures. What do you think are the examples of like where it worked and where it failed spectacularly?
So in terms of it, like governance succeeding, I think the miracle of governance is layer one blockchain governance. It is Bitcoin governance for all its messiness these days, Ethereum governance, and then say Solana governance. And I presume if you move this out, the situation in my mind is just that there's so much going on that 3 blockchains is like my bandwidth. I'm sure there are other blockchains that are also well managed and like very decentralized. So I always feel bad when I'm condensing it down to these 3. I'm sure say Near and Avalanche are also well governed, or I presume so. They might be terribly governed. So the miracle is that the chains themselves have been going for 15, 10, or 5 years, where we have this miracle of a meritocracy. The nature of that meritocracy, of course, once you look into the details of it, is quite complicated. Who's funding who works for which client team, etc. But generally speaking, it is somebody who gets an interest in open source development, likes a blockchain community, and then starts working on the Ethereum protocol or the Bitcoin protocol. And that's an interesting thing in itself. It's actually one of the hardest things to get across to my students is that people are not working for a company. They just can't imagine for the first 2 weeks or 3 weeks that Bitcoin isn't the place that you go to, an office or something along those lines. So yeah, and then we also have let's say the improvement proposal process. So it is crazy to think that's how we do it. We just come up with proposals. We put those proposals on the internet for anybody to review. And then those proposals go through this churn of various different places where some of it's very high detail feedback. So the Magicians Forum in Ethereum's case, or ETH Research, or also the Discord. There's the Ethereum R&D Discord as well, which is very high level. But then crypto Twitter is the furnace. So if your improvement proposal is, let's say, problematic, let's say something like up return in Bitcoin, then it's going to go through the crucible or the furnace of the crypto Twitter social media. The podcasts as well are also this other place where there's a like memeplex around, say, governance. Governance is treated with a light hand on, say, modern market-based podcasts, but it does come up. There is an interest in it. I've definitely seen some curiosity about it. I don't know if that's like an ominous thing that they're interested. they're going to turn up soon. And then, yeah, then a client gets released, you download that client, you're running a node. And then in a way that you're also the last defense that, if something ever goes wrong, that you running that node is able to curtail an attack by some much more powerful entity. I find that like the most beautiful thing of crypto is the idea of all the nodes just out there in the world. And it doesn't matter if you're the biggest miners and biggest exchanges, or in Ethereum's case, it might be dark, evil Tom Lee who's gone rogue. Maybe he's in an alliance with some nation state or something like this. That even then, they could never get you to run that software. So you could always choose to just run a different version or hard fork away. So you can never really be attacked. I've always believed that this is an important thing about blockchains. Like they can never really make you follow their rules, and I think that's the miracle of governance. And then maybe on the other side of the negativity, I do think it's the theater kind of aspect of it. The fact that when people talk about progressive decentralization, I actually almost at this point would call it progressive centralization, because what happens is the company creates a token. They say, okay, we're now going to be a DAO, but they keep a foundation around, and that foundation is just hanging around there, and it's maybe got some staff as well, and they're doing the calls, and they're maybe doing stuff at Dev Connect or whatever it is that they happen to be doing it as a kind of organizational community. They're often organizing the votes and the proposals, and getting people to post things, etc. So they retain their power. They're always there. And then we also have the whale situation. Under themselves has like a huge amount of tokens, so they're always able to flex their power. Rune at MakerDAO/Sky is the famous example of this. That is a major failure. That's just I don't think there's anything you can do about this. Like if we're looking at it from a pure rational market-based orientation, why would you fully give up your influence over something you created? So you create a new layer 2 or a new decentralized finance protocol. You're going to find some way to keep some influence over that. And if it was just honest, if the idea was the rest of the token holders are just giving their insight or feedback to the direction of how they wish the DAO to go, but ultimately it's settled by the foundation, I would be okay with that. I think probably most people in crypto today would as well. But we did just that's the honesty aspect needs to become more important there.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue into my next question, which is around TGEs. Most crypto projects end up having tokens. And with the current way that the TGE meta is being played, so TGE, for people listening that don't know, is token generation event. And now it's like essentially like there's a lot of airdrop farming. There's a lot of like high preparation ahead of TGE, KOL incentivization, things like that. Do you think that current model is sustainable? Do you think it's headed for a crash? How do you think that model will evolve into something that can be less gamed?
Every time I think airdrops are dead, a new thing pops up. So the Monad card, I didn't even apply for the card on time, but they added me to a list, and I just thought this was a typical scam, but it was actually from the main Monad account, where they had the little reminder by adding you to a list of people who received the card, even if you didn't apply at the right time, like you forgot. And so I've managed to qualify for Monad via this route, so I was pretty happy with that. But at the same time, I do remember when airdrops first came around, I was really interested in them because for me, it was a way to interact with protocols that I wouldn't necessarily really want to. Actually, not that I wouldn't want to interact with them, but I wouldn't get around to doing it otherwise. So I learned a lot from airdrops because that's how I learned about L2s. I think the fluency with L2s was just from bridging over with airdrops and then interacting with different protocols and just figuring out what exactly it meant for be an L2 pragmatically or visually or tactically was actually through airdrops. So that was an interesting part of it. But then you also saw how it accelerated, as you again would expect if we think about this logically as market-based people, that of course, you're going to get people who then begin gamifying it, who turn it into a job, especially with our global disparity. So if I'm a Westerner who doesn't really need an airdrop and I'm just learning about L2s, well, I'm competing with God knows how many people that if they get, say, $1,000 or $2,000, like this is like a huge amount of money. So it's going to go in that direction. It effectively makes the social side of those worlds toxic very often. So one thing you see is a genuine toxicity. So let's say the MetaMask airdrop, whatever happens with the MetaMask airdrop, I don't think anybody is going to be happy. That's one thing we know for sure. The benefits, like the social benefits of doing an airdrop, seem to get slimmer and slimmer each time. At the same time, it is also a really effective way to distribute the token, right? It's a way to get it out there, to get it out into a large amount of the community. That's like a user base if they're not selling immediately, but some people are going to remain as a ZK Sync user or an Optimism user or an Arbitrum user or the many different DeFi protocols as well. Yeah, so it's easy to critique, but at the same time, it's almost like impossible to imagine another way of doing this. One thing I do like is Echo and Legion. So they're not perfect, but I really enjoy the idea of you signing up to a website. You're just a normal person, so you're not like a VC, and you're able to get into like a little round, and I guess you kind of feel like a little bit of a VC, but you're able to buy some mega ETH. The way a VC could, like a little bit earlier than other people. Yeah, I that feels a little bit more direct than the messiness of dealing with an airdrop and all of the fallout. Just allow people to have a simple round, to operate as micro VCs, to try get into the round, and then it's over and it's done. The other way of doing this, of course, is just to have ICOs, but I think the problem with ICOs is just that it doesn't really have the responsibility part. I know on Solana they have MetaDAO, which is some kind of effectively an ICO system, but you can rug the project. Like, you know, if they're not doing their job, like you can basically just take all of the funding away from them. So that's a possibility. But for me, yeah, just keep it simple. Just Echo, Legion, that's the way to go, I think.
Got it. One thing I also wanted to touch on is Ethereum's recent repositioning and wartime arc. There's been treasury reforms, there's been governance shifts post-merge recently. Like, what do you think this repositioning is about? Do you think Ethereum is just like toughening up? Do you think Ethereum is becoming Solana-like, or do you think it's, I guess, like, do you think it might cause like its demise?
Yeah, fair concern. The populist revolt is how I think about this. So there's different ways of thinking about what happened here. One again is this is the threat of Solanas. The people who were, say, the originators of this revolt again, and it's against the Ethereum Foundation specifically, or it was against the Ethereum Foundation specifically, were people who wanted ETH to go to 10K. So they're kind of crypto, Twitter, market oriented people, but also people who looked at Solana and they knew about things like the super teams, which are in every city. And if you're, you know, if you're active in a local scene anywhere in, say, in many parts of the world, like you will begin encountering more and more Solana people. And I think that that's something that they were beginning to pick up on. So they wanted pragmatism. What they wanted was, we understand that you're OG cypherpunks and you believe in decentralization and permissionlessness and censorship resistance and credible neutrality and open participation, the things you might see on Make Ethereum Cypherpunk Again or the Ethereum Cypherpunk Manifesto. Or if you're a participant or a member of the Civil Culture Society, which I am, so that's the kind of group of, you know, the cypherpunk type people. But they're looking for people that mirror their pragmatism. Okay, I'm an Ethereum holder. I want Ethereum to go to Ether to go to 10K. I want some institutional adoption, but I also want to see applications. But there's nobody that I see in the leadership who reflects that. And so bring us in some kind of pragmatist person. And that's where we get our Tomas as the co-executive. You also see Dankrad become a very important figure here. This type of Ethereum I call like Tomasism or Dankradism. It's a near-term thinker. So like, and that's not meant in a negative way, as in they're really interested in problems of 2 to 3 years that they can solve. They're interested in Ethereum's competitive place. Like they're competitive-minded pragmatists, but they're Ethereum aligned. And so the people wanted them to be in positions of power so that they could actually influence what was going on. So yeah, so it's an introduction of the pragmatist mindset alongside the OG cypherpunk mindset. In terms of how this changes things, I think that's where it's a complicated story, because I actually tend to see pragmatism and OG cypherpunk as not that incongruous as maybe people might imagine. So I think when we saw this shakeup, people's fear on both sides might have been, okay, well, we're going to just turn into like Solana, or on the other side, nothing is going to change, and we're just going to be the out of touch cypherpunk theorists or academics almost. That's something that I see people kind of accuse Ethereum researchers as being a kind of like academic minded, but out of touch and not really aware of what's going on. But really, this is where the hybrid influence tends to come along. What I have noticed is you tend to see Vitalik becoming a little bit more pragmatist. So he writes about like low risk DeFi, right? So that's something you wouldn't really expect Vitalik to be talking about. You also see then on the other side, if you look at something like Tomas and Dankrad, they use these terms of privacy, security, censorship resistance, or crops. There's also a term that you sometimes hear, which comes from the Ethereum Cypherpunk Manifesto. So they're reading more cypherpunk stuff and it's appearing in their work. And then the cypherpunks are being influenced by the pragmatists. So they're influencing each other more than they seem to be canceling each other out. So in my view, this is probably a good thing. It means that you get this hybrid culture, whereas Solana culture at the moment is mostly pragmatists, but they've also got this hint of cypherpunk coming in. And I wonder whether without this populist revolt, that would have happened. Maybe that's the downstream effect. The culture, the Solana culture unconsciously realizes that it's now dealing with this pragmatist and cypherpunk mindset in Ethereum. So it itself like finds a way to introduce cypherpunk into its own world. So that's like maybe like some metaphysical cultural analysis there. So yeah, I don't think it's a negative thing. I think it's a good thing, but like it wasn't obvious that was the outcome. If you go to an Ethereum conference today, you do see the emphasis on apps. So you do see the emphasis on institutional. The developer talk is still there. It's still the main thing, but it's not everything. And that's like the people who did this revolt. They were right. They saw the problem. And they went up against effectively like very powerful entrenched Ethereum culture, cypherpunk, of which I would include myself at that time, because I wasn't very like really would be dismissive of a lot of this stuff, and it took me a long time to see their arguments to actually say, okay, they're right. So it's a very successful revolt, and also one that I would call in the blockchain context bloodless, in that it didn't require any kind of like a technical change, or there wasn't like something controversial where anybody was forced into doing anything else. The worst thing that happens is like Aya moves from one job to another, so that was like maybe the sacrifice, but generally speaking nothing terrible happened.
And do you think like also like this pragmatism is also, or maybe like specifically like tech pragmatism is coming also on the Bitcoin side? We've seen over the past 2 years like a lot of changing in the debate landscape of Bitcoin. When ordinals first appeared, when now like essentially like the drama around the Bitcoin core upgrade. There's like a bunch of Bitcoiners that want to use the blockchain for more than just like sending and receiving a BTC, and like being able to bring more expressiveness to the blockchain, also because they want to have sustainable usage of the Bitcoin layer one for Bitcoin itself to be less dependent on future emissions. What do you think about the current state of Bitcoin governance with all of that in mind?
I'm fascinated by the Bitcoin culture, even though it's a minority sport to be interested in it these days if you're not of the Bitcoin world, because in a way what they did is they, through maximalism, separated themselves in some way. So if you're interested in Ethereum or Solana, you're probably interested in Bitcoin, you probably own some Bitcoin maybe, and you're kind of positively predisposed to it as an asset, let's say, but you probably don't really know what's going on in the culture, and you're probably happy to stay away from it because it seems kind of crazy to you. So like if you drop into the middle of a Bitcoin conversation, it's always going to be a little bit crazy. Actually, Bitcoin retains the most countercultural aspect. Bitcoin is like you go out to some festival, like a Psytrance festival in the woods, and people are talking about crazy conspiracy theories. Like Bitcoin still has a little bit of this still going on, which is kind of cool. I quite like that. But in terms of this debate, actually, here's where that can be a little bit of a problem. So like Bitcoin Core versus Knots is essentially a populist versus elite. So Bitcoin Core is effectively seen at this point as an elite, and the populists are more associated then with Luke and his Bitcoin Knots client, which is basically just Bitcoin Core with a few changes, particularly around filtering spam. And so what I think when I think about Core is there is some truth that they are an elite. So, but they've adopted this "we are the elite." Like they explicitly refer to themselves, like in their arguments, as like "we are the elite." Like we are. This is not a democracy. It's something they say quite a bit as well. Like Jameson Lopp is always kind of arguing this. So, like they have like they're responsible partly for creating this image of themselves as the people who've got the skill set to shape the protocol in whatever way that they want. And then on the other side of it is the populism, which has been like historically was stoked as a response to in the Bitcoin Civil War. One of the reasons why it was so successful, the winning side, is that there was a strong social media campaign around personalities like people like Samson Now or Jimmy Song. They became these voices, these like defenders of the small blockers. And that created a type of Bitcoin populism where people were interested in more like a political Bitcoin. And then over time, that really almost very closely aligned itself to a MAGA Bitcoin. So, like, Bitcoiners became very, very supportive of the Trumpian wave. So, that era of Trump really coming to power and really being America first, like, Bitcoiners really, really adopted that. So, the Bitcoin conferences, which I watch every year and encourage everybody to watch. They're amazing. They had like Trump speaking at it. JD Vance would go, and if you go to a Bitcoin conferences in the UK, you'll have like Nigel Farage, that kind of thing. So they're closer to power in that regard. But it means the populist strain is like populism is dangerous is the main message. I sound like a real academic. Populism is dangerous, but I do think it's dangerous for any open source project because it always invites the possibility that somebody is portrayed as an elite. So historically, the elite was outside, right? So Bitcoiners, the elite is like fiat currency. It's the central bank. It's all the enemies. Actually, fiat academia is something that Safadine usually says. Yeah, so the enemy is outside. At some point, your populist group goes, actually, I wonder if we have any elites in our group, and they apply their conspiratorial thinking to their own internal project because things are going generally well, so like they were going well, but then there's like always this desire. That's like conspiratorial thinking needs something to kind of latch onto. And core is perfect for that because you effectively have this history of people, like they're individuals that you can chart online. You can look for connections between them. Maybe they give a talk to Citibank in 2018, a benign talk, but like if you put it on a map, like a Charlie from It's Always Sunny map, then you could make it look much worse. And yeah, at some point you can effectively begin portraying them as the elite, and that's what happened in that case. Even better if you can have your very own Alex Jones, which is what Luke Dash Jr. is. He's this like really, really out there person who believes the most. Like Mel Gibson would be shy at some of his kind of Christian strangeness. Like he really, really has like a deep, unusual views. At some point, they'll turn on him. That's the way it works. So my view on this has always been that at some point the populists are going to say that Satoshi was not cypherpunk because at the moment they're running through everybody. Jameson Lopp is not really Bitcoin. He's secretly trying to undermine it. Adam Back, right? People cited in the white paper itself, like they're persona non grata. At some point, it's going to be Satoshi on the list. So yeah, so populism is very dangerous. I think in Ethereum it was handled very well, but I always do think that there's always the potential for an Ethereum populist. Like there was one, so that it's important to state that did happen. But I can imagine it happening again. But yeah, Bitcoin's in the middle of its populism versus elite conspiratorial era, and it's very entertaining. I encourage anybody to check it out.
And do you think this cultural divide is actually like a good thing? I do think it's like the social layer strengthening itself through this paranoia, or like because one of the good outcomes that is coming from this recent drama is in a way like client diversity, which is a good thing for blockchains. Do you think do you think it's a force for good, or do you think it could be like hurting Bitcoin and lead to maybe like a hard fork?
Yeah, it's a good question because it one of the themes of this governance debate is that people did refer to it as maybe a second civil war. So that's been something that's also interesting because that's also a question that we have in our societies at the moment is like, are we about to have a civil war in the UK or in the United States? So we're mirroring the broader society in some kind of way as well. But I don't think that this was ever going to be a hard fork because I don't think that there was really an appetite to go that far. So there was a solution ready and waiting. So running Bitcoin knots and not relaying transactions is like sufficient to essentially create a sufficient to solve most people's fears. So most people, like, it's like a moral question that they have is around, I don't want to be relaying those transactions. I don't want to be responsible for doing that or storing them on my node. Whereas a hard fork, I think, would have been a question of them feeling that they were forced into doing something. So they're not being forced to do anything. Now, whether they all completely believe that, I'm not sure, but it's certainly not enough of them who believe it that they would call for an actual breaking away, separation, the same way Bitcoin Cash did back in the day. Yeah, I don't know if client diversity is necessarily a good thing in this case, because let's say if we talk about client diversity, we're thinking of the Ethereum case. You say, okay, well, if one client fails, well, we have like a backup and it won't be ever be that bad. And then you have all these client teams, and those client teams are, consensus and execution client teams, and they're all very highly skilled, or they do what they do. But in the case of Bitcoin, it's unusual. You have Bitcoin Core, and then you have Bitcoin Knots, which is effectively just maintained by one person. Now, I don't want to I don't want to comment too much on the nature of this, because true Bitcoiners will have like much stronger, more in-depth views on it. But maybe like if Luke can kind of create this team around himself, and then maybe there could be an interesting case where people look at Luke and say, we need an alternative to Knots. We need an alternative to the alternative, in which case that would be an interesting direction. So I don't know. In the case of Bitcoin, I think one of its strengths is that it has this elite. I do think there is a cypherpunk elite within every community, and that cypherpunk elite is effectively the social layer proper. So when people use the term social layer, they'll say the social layer is the community. I sometimes see this in media articles like Unchained, etc. And to me, that's too vague. Everyone who's using it is like the social layer, or the social layer is, um, say, everyone on crypto Twitter who's like really interested in Ethereum, and like maybe the podcasts as well. So they're like influencing the direction of it. Or the social layer is governance. So the social layer is just EIPs plus this, ACD calls, etc. But I don't tend to think about it that way. I tend to think the social layer is the cypherpunk inflected part of the community that is very rarely actually evoked. And I think originally this is how people use the term social layer. It's been diluted over time. So when I think of the social layer, I'm thinking of who are the people where, if there is a genuine existential threat to the chain, who are the ones who can actually defend it against this takeover. And that's a relatively small group of people. So it is going to be like the node runners, maybe some validators, which are kind of blurry in Ethereum. Lots of the client team developers would be like that. People who work at the Ethereum Foundation, people like Anthony Sassano. But I don't think it's everybody. I don't think it's just because you're an Ethereum user, you're therefore the social layer. I think the social layer is a defensive that is evoked actually very rarely. And when it is evoked, it typically is evoked along cypherpunk lines. But that's a very specific use of social layer. I don't think probably take me like a long time to convince people of that. But I do think it's maybe like overused too much. But in Bitcoin's case, when I think of the social layer, who are the people who really could protect Bitcoin? It is probably the Bitcoin core developers, as sort of oddballs as they all tend to be. They're all kind of perfect for the job. They're quirky libertarians who just believe that Bitcoin is a technical project and we just kind of need to keep it running. And like, even if you look at their explanation of like up return, it's the most mundane technical description. It's dispassionate, like very objective reasoning about it. There's no moral aspect to it there. And then if you introduce the kind of populist moralism, then you have the danger of like Bitcoin having a viewpoint. And I think if Bitcoin has a viewpoint other than cypherpunk, then that's where you might get into the situation of fracturing of the community. Yeah, something along those lines.
Super interesting. Paul, we're already way over time. I just want to ask one last questions before we go. How do you think about cyclicality in crypto? Like we talk a lot about 4-year cycles, like those are price cycles. But how do you think these impact the social layer?
Yeah, so again, here, I think it really depends on the sense we have of social layer. So when it comes to, say, social layer as just the community, the people who are involved in Ethereum as vocal participants. So in some way they talk on Twitter, or they're on podcasts, or they go to conferences. Actually, that's another important part of it. This is just a group of people who will churn and they will change. And this is not a bad thing. This is just a natural way that communities and cultures evolve. And so what will happen is we'll just see different narratives come and go. And those narratives will sometimes be good for the markets and good for price. And also those narratives will sometimes be the reason why people actually become embedded in the community. So that might be the old school narratives of some primitive DAOs, DeFi, NFTs, or modern narratives, which are much shorter. So some kind of meta, maybe meme coins, or at the moment, privacy, which for me is a very exciting development. You wouldn't naturally have presumed that would be what was becoming the thing. As long as those narratives that the communities and cultures are interested in tend to be more emergent and natural, like it's coming from people's interest in those topics, then I think we're in a good place. The real danger is the post-ideological pragmatist reading, which looks at these narratives and says, like, the only purpose of narratives is to, like, it doesn't matter if people believe in the narratives, all that matters is that the narratives move the needle. I think once we get there, you're in the gray, beige, KPMG, Deloitte world, and that's to be avoided. And then when it comes to the social layer proper, so the cypherpunk inflected part of it, that I don't think changes. That's the firmament, that's the foundation, that's the ineliminable core. So regardless of what happens in those worlds, as long as we have those people who still believe in cypherpunk and are willing to defend it as the core principles, then the cycle can change. It can be time is a flat circle, Russ Cole and True Detective, but the cypherpunks will still be there, kind of hiding. Maybe they might just be in the corner saying, by the way, there are red lines we don't cross. That might even be enough to be like the social layer, as I say it.
Paul, this was a fabulous conversation. Thank you so much for joining. Before you go, can you please share with the audience where they can follow you, where they can read you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, the best place would be on crypto Twitter, sadly, of course. So post_polar_. And then if you, probably the best thing would be my book, Absolute Essentials of Ethereum, which you can just get on Amazon, etc. And if you leave a review, that would be a great thing as well.
Paul, thanks again. And to the audience, I'll see you in the next one.